There we are. Hey everybody, welcome to another Piece of Ash Patreon edition. This one's from my patrons who are of course going to hang out with me for the next 90 minutes, chat and talk and answer questions from the mailbags. For those of you who are in time zones across the world that could not make it to this live, of course, there's always the mailbag that you can drop questions into. And for those of you guys hanging out with me in the chat, we will talk about Wargaming. I got some stuff in my mind. It's funny, actually, spurred from a conversation I had with Joey from World's End Publishing that does This Is Not a Test this morning, and then the announcement from the Games Workshop community page, some of the rules for the new Reavers for the Primaris Space Marines, and that's about the sort of fad right now of reaction fire in wargaming, of having the experience of playing a game with your opponent include you doing things while they're doing things. So reacting and acting in wargaming. It's kind of on my brain right now. That's what I want to talk about. So I'm going to throw that out there as a topic, and we'll talk about it in the chat, of course, how you guys feel about that kind of stuff and how you think it affects games. Obviously, it's a huge part of Infinity, the ARO system, acting and reacting. That give and take is something that is one of the fundamental principles of the game. And it's becoming a very big deal in Warhammer 40k, which I find interesting because it was previously in the second edition of 40k, a big part of the game. And it was actually just removed completely for almost 4 or 5 editions, and it's funny that they brought it back, and it's actually brought back in a big way in this edition, with lots and lots of sort of things that you can build into your army now that can skew it. So it's something that you always think about in things like Infinity, because it is just a how do you put it, a sort of like principle in the game that your opponent's going to get to do things so he can see you, and you have to plan accordingly to do so. In the new version of 40k, being able to overwatch, which is of course a sort of like incredibly powerful tool in your toolkit now in 40k, is really kind of a big deal, and kind of it changed a lot of the things that happened in the game. So I think, yeah, it's gonna be an interesting topic, and I'm gonna have you guys pick your brains about it while we do some questions. So I'm gonna jump into the mailbag and take some questions from the beginning just to get us started, and then you guys in the chat throw out some questions too, and we will get ourselves going and start our Piece of Ash. So yeah, so I just want to get your brains working. First question from the mailbag comes from Tanman 5000. Sounds like he's kind of the who's that guy? Kind of a Hulk Hogan-y name, very tanned. Hey Ash, super stoked that you're doing a Piece of Ash so frequently. It's my favorite show to listen to while painting. Question: do you and the family have any crazy plans for Canada 150? We didn't. I think I've actually gotten this question before. We didn't do a lot for Canada 150 because my mother-in-law's birthday is on Canada Day every year. So we kind of play it by ear just to see what she wants to do. And so this year we actually had a race that my wife was in for her rowing crew that we went to, and we sat and cheered her on a little bit, and then we had dinner. I cooked a huge barbecue, and we had a big dinner and just sat in the backyard and kind of relaxed. And then we kind of had a second Canada Day actually this weekend with my family out in, it's called Northumberland County. It's basically like the north of Lake Ontario, kind of like Highlands, and it's a big farm community with all that stuff. My parents have 310 acres out there, and so my kids just like to run, and they have a great big pool. So we spent most of this week outside. My father had, of course, bought far too many fireworks and silly things like that, and so we had like a second round of big fireworks and cake and big burnt like cookouts and stuff like that too. Sleeping in tents, running outside, getting bug bit, the Grand Canadian tradition. So I feel like we got a pretty solid Canada 150, and we did a lot of very Canadian things like being outside and drinking beer and just like, yeah, kind of just celebrating, I guess, what our country is. And I think our country is our country itself, you know what I mean? Being outdoors, being in the thick of it. So it was really good. Really enjoyed it. We didn't go into a city to enjoy our country. We went out another country to enjoy our country, I guess is what I'd say. What's next? I have to jump around windows now to see what people are saying. Tom Lynch says, could you add some paint videos, Dark Age preferred? I would love to be able to satisfy your guys' need for painting videos, apart from doing my roundup. And it's funny because I've been doing this stuff, and then of course because my wife's work schedule is picking up, I'm actually having less and less time to do videos in general. And I've actually gotten kind of truant on the paint table stuff, which is where I usually do a little bit of painting stuff. But as I said before, the hardest thing with painting is the only activity in Wargaming I have left that I don't share with you guys. so the painting and modeling stuff, actually I do some painting stuff while I'm sitting here talking to you guys sometimes. It depends on how busy I am or what I'm working on. Some things I can't obviously do. I was going to build these guys today, the Vanguard Hunters, but I don't know if I'm going to get to, just because I've got a lot of stuff I want to do with you guys in the chat and talking and stuff. So yeah, so I don't tend to do that. It's funny, what I might do, if you want to see some Dark Age stuff, is I don't know who's, because Dave's not doing it anymore, and I don't know if they're going to keep doing it, but I would volunteer to do a project for Paint Splatter. Splatier. Sorry, it's not Paint Splatter from Games Workshop, it's Paint Splatier from Dark Age. So I can do an article for that. If you guys want to see that, maybe just bug whoever's now in charge of the Dark Age website and doing that promotion stuff to get in touch with me, and I will happily volunteer to do a test run on the model, because they do some cool stuff like that. What's next? This is the current mailbag. No, maybe some of these questions haven't been before. Let's try over here. Oh, I remember now. Yeah, I remember now. Because this survey, we didn't get to do a lot of the last survey, did we? That's right, we didn't get to do all of the YouTube survey last time, and I was saving the rest of the last YouTube survey for this. And I published that link for you guys too. So let's jump into there and grab these new questions, because yes, you guys have probably heard the answer to those first two questions before, and I thought it weird. Yes, there's two huge spikes in this one. That's why. We're going through the other mailbag. Over here. Boom. Got it. Got new questions. Found where the new questions are at. And here we go. New ones. Rubric Dynasty says, what's a good way to motivate a friend to paint and play 40K? He's got all the models, loves the lore, and likes the idea of playing, but never really gets motivated to follow through. Any tips? Well, okay. So, Benoit, I love the play on words with paint splat here. Yeah, there's a funny story behind the name for that maybe Dave will tell you guys sometime, but it was funny. So motivating people to paint, and I mean this isn't like a 40K thing, motivating people to paint and play in general takes work. And I'll tell you, I know that from experience, obviously, because one of my big jobs when I was helping guys in retail with Games Workshop was how do you get your customers through that when you're in a retail store? And that translates not just to Games Workshop stores, but any hobby store where the person that owns it, or at least someone working there, if they've got like an employee that's like in charge of like the Wargaming section, what really benefits them as a community builder, and of course then benefits them in sales too, is if people are constantly like finishing their projects because they're ready to move on to something else. One of the most daunting things in Wargaming is when you have this like big sea of unpainted crap in front of you, and it's why actually one of the things I started doing towards like the last probably like 10 years is I had a habit basically when I was younger of I would buy an entire army in a go. I would sit down, and it's funny because there's a Nigel Stillman article about this. I would write a 2,000 point army list for whatever I was playing, or if it was like 40K, it'd be like an 1850, whatever the current contemporary list was. I'd buy just those models, I'd get them all assembled, and I would sit down and I would like power through painting them. And that's a young man's game. I mean, I could conceivably still do it, and I probably should do it just from like a logistical point of view of what I'm doing. It would probably help break up my projects. But I really get overwhelmed when there's too many miniatures in front of me, and I find it depressing. And that's probably what your friend is going through, if that's the case. If he's got like all the stuff to play and he likes the idea of playing, but he's just bogged down because he has all this stuff and it's just not done. And so if that's the case, because I used to encounter customers like that all the time, and my staff would encounter customers like that all the time, the best thing to do is some type of staged like activity, you know what I mean? Something where you don't have to do all the work all at once. Like the worst thing is like we have to go from 0 to like 2,000 points, right? You can't put it until you're 2,000 points or it's all assembled or whatever. Because the problem is there's no reward, sort of like there's nothing to encourage you to get to the next thing. Like if you finish a unit, you don't really feel like you finished the unit. So like, because just there's another unit behind that unit that needs to get done, and ad infinitum basically, like going forever. And so what we would usually do is we would organize something, or we would plan something just amongst ourselves as a group even, where we would, and this actually, we did this a lot when we were when we were even just like whatchamacallit, when we were doing like what is it, like in-house stuff. Like me and my friends were actually planning projects. Is we would challenge ourselves to get X or Y amount of points finished, and then move on to the next thing. And that was like a really helpful sort of like activity, because then instead of having to do everything all at once, we would do a challenge like where you say, okay, let's get the first squad done, and then let's play like a combat patrol or a kill team mission. We'll all get together and we'll do that. And that was usually the stage at which we're getting the what is it, oh, did we get some echo effect here? Hang on. We must have bad audio coming through. Yeah, we got two audio lines all of a sudden. There we go. Is that fixed? Yeah, what happened is we accidentally hit the laptop audio all of a sudden kicked in there. Anyway, hopefully that's fixed now. So yeah, we would get together and we would all play a game with two, like, you know, like maybe a squad or something of guys, and that would kind of reward us for the bit of like work that we'd done, you know. So we'd all get together, we basically have our color schemes nailed down at that point, and then we play a game where the sort of like reward of getting together and actually playing a game meant that we went home and we felt like, oh yeah, now I'm ready to paint my next unit. And then we would just organize something a little bit bigger the next time. So we'd go from, let's say, a kill team game to a, the next level, like a combat patrol. And then from a combat patrol, like maybe like a small, like 500, like 750 point game. And it kind of broke up the work we had to do so that there was always like a little bit of incentive to going on to the next thing and painting the next thing and going a little bit further. And that was really useful for me personally to like get over that overwhelming feeling of this like sea of gray plastic in front of us. So yeah, so maybe do that. Like that's the only thing I can really, I mean, from experience, that's what's kind of like taught me is a really powerful tool for motivating people that might feel overwhelmed when they're like sort of like confronted by this huge immense workload of like what they have to do. Because you're not kind of like trying to climb the mountain all in one go. You're hitting like a base camp and you're camping for the night and you're feeling pretty good, and then you're doing the next stage, and then you're camping for the night and you're feeling pretty good, you're doing the next stage, and you're not having to like try and just like summit this thing all at once basically. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that, and it's always worked in the past. I mentally just do that now when I try and approach projects usually. Instead of trying to buy something all at once, I'll do it in stages. Actually, Dark Age is actually a really good example of that. I powered through. So, like, all of my Dark Age minis were, like, 10, 15 years old. They were all old. Like, they're the original minis from the first edition of the game. And so when I was getting ready to come into the Cool Mini Expo, I made this, like, commitment to myself that I wasn't going to show up and play in this big, like, you know, Immortals tournament with old miniatures. And so I collected all new basically army of all new sculpts, and also Dave probably would have killed me, but of all new sculpts, and I powered through painting like this first leg of stuff basically for my Forsaken army, and it was just like the heretic stuff and all the, it was actually mostly generic Forsaken stuff. I just bought 4 blisters and I made an army out of it, and I peppered it with like the heretic stuff to kind of make it work. But now that I've gone home after that, the next stage was like, well, I'm really excited about the 2-player starter set for Dark Age, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy that, and I'm going to add that to my existing Forsaken collection, and it's like another little like module of like 6 or 8 miniatures I have to paint. That's not too much stuff, but I get like a whole new gaming experience. And so I did that. So Steve and I from Mini Wargaming, we kind of did this like little challenge where like you spent a week painting another add-on. We went and played some games. We both went home jazzed and like basically started working on new stuff for the next leg. So like now that I'm done, I'm gonna go paint my strikes. I'm gonna go paint my Discmaster. And so for the next time Steve and I get together to play some Dark Age, I'll have like the next chunk of stuff done basically. And that's a good example. It's what I'm doing right now with my Knights for 40k. Sorry, Dave says, killed you? No, made relentless fun of you? Sure. Well, that's the same thing, man. I'd be dead in the eyes of the public. Like, I can't be that guy. I can't scrub out. So yeah, so like I'm doing it with 40k right now, where I'm painting my knights. I can just add something new to my army, and that knight. The cool thing about it is it kind of just, because it's its own detachment, it just kind of slots into any of my imperial armies, and I get to play with it, and I get to like feel like I'm trying a new game, but I'm not going and like powering through a whole new 40k army all in one shot, which I think is super useful. Like it becomes, I think if you get into the habit of doing that, you don't bog yourself down with a sea of plastic in the future, and that might help your friend. Just as like some friendly advice, like don't try and eat the elephant all at once. Right? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Break it into bites first, and then you know how many bites you have to do, which is just a much easier way of doing things. Ronnie Segden asks, hey Ash, terrain in gaming, simple rules or complex, lots of game or little, 2D or 3D, what games do you think terrain is done well for, and what games do you think does terrain poorly? That's a really complex question, but I think that what's good about it is you're basing it in one sort of like point of view. You're talking mostly about rules here, and types of terrain, which is 2D, 3D, whatever. I approach terrain from a totally different place. I approach terrain from how does it add to the way I feel when I play a game. And so maybe that answers the 2D, 3D part of your question. I immensely dislike 2D terrain, except as a last resort. I don't think 2D terrain, I don't think playing on pictures of terrain, with some extensions. I like gaming mats, and I like gaming mats because they're not really terrain per se. They're more like a backdrop you get to put terrain on, and they're super useful. And they tend to actually, I think, add a level of detail that would be very hard to actually achieve physically doing it, because the detail is so small and minute that doing it yourself by hand wouldn't capture the same effect as having a terrain mat would have. I tend to just immensely prefer 3D terrain, because to me the point of having terrain is it helps you feature the models that you've worked so hard to build and play with, and it's just another level of immersion to the game where you feel like you're watching this little movie and you're drawn into what's happening. Because to me, that's the whole point of miniature wargaming. Why even play miniature wargames if you're not being drawn into the experience of this tiny world you've created, where little men are marching around having battles and like fighting each other? If that's not the point of playing with toy soldiers, then just play board games or play video games. Like if that's not an important facet of it to you, then I think you're missing out on something, and that's okay. Like it's your right to enjoy the things that you enjoy. It's everyone's right to like what they like and like the part of the experience that's the most important to them. But then don't interfere with the other half. You know what I mean? If your favorite part is one, don't try and tell people that they shouldn't play on 3D terrain as well, because that's really important to me. I actually have had that discussion before with a lot of competitive game, sort of like fanatics, people that really like competitive games, who believe that 2D terrain is very important to like the integrity of their game, and I have a hard time explaining to them very often that the conversation that they're trying to have with me doesn't start in any kind of common ground, because I don't care about that. I have enough of a comfort level of social contract that I believe that my opponent and I are both going to do our best to make sure our measurements are as close to precise as possible, but that we accept that we're both human and it's probably not going to be perfect. But if it needed to be perfect for the game to be played properly, then it's probably not a game I want to be playing anyway. And so it's very difficult, because very often I find myself trying these conversations where people will talk about how important it is to not have 3D terrain on a game table, or even in videos people comment and be like, why are you playing with all this terrain? And I've accepted the fact that because I don't have a common like starting point with those people, they're not going to understand why it's so important for me to do that, and I understand for them why it is, but I don't share their need for that. You know what I mean? I don't share their starting place for that. And so I can accept that that's how they want to play the game, and I'm perfectly happy to let them play the game that way. But at the same time, I wish there was less like, why do you put all this terrain, you're screwing up the game, blah, 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 comments that came towards me, because I'm like, but without the terrain, like, what's the point? I don't even see the point of playing toy soldiers if I'm just playing on a picture of a table, you know what I mean, as opposed to playing on an actual gaming table. And so I think that 2D and 3D terrain, they're for very different types of people that are looking for a very different experience, and both are fine. Well, like most things in any kind of hobby or interest, I'm very much a like live and let live kind of guy. Like I just want to be left alone to enjoy what I enjoy, you know, and even to enjoy games that people will tell me aren't supposed to be played that way. Well, I'm gonna play them that way. Sorry. And I actually, oh geez, I'm supposed to be turned off. I actually jumped into it's funny. That was Mike Wolf messaging me on Facebook to say I should take off my pants in the live stream. Thanks, Mike. I'm glad you're using your work time for important things today. The interesting thing I think about that is terrain is actually coming up a whole bunch in the conversation. So I think Ronnie, you and I talked about terrain a bunch because you and I played 40K recently. Ronnie was actually in the studio playing 40K with me, and we had to have a really long conversation about what terrain counted as in the game, because the new 40K handles the model kits for terrain that GW sells relatively well, but not much else. And so there's been a lot of questions about how terrain works in that game, which I think is leading to maybe like an existential question as to what does terrain mean in wargaming. I tend to find that when I see games of 40K being played right now, I think that most of them are played with far too little terrain, and that tends to make the games feel very different. Because if everything's basically open, because the way that most of the terrain rules work in the new 40K is you have to be completely inside it for the most part. If it's like a ruin, like that's the generic rules. If every part of a model is inside the terrain, then it gets +1 its cover save for infantry. And if it's every part and for certain things, so there's so many exceptions too. For certain things, if every part of the model is inside the terrain and it's at least 50% obscure, then you get +1 your cover save. And it's very much, it requires a lot of agreements beforehand with your opponent. And so we've come up with like our own terrain rules basically for the studio that Owen and I are playing with, just to be consistent amongst ourselves and like so we have a consistent experience. But none of it's covered in the rulebook. Like none of it's covered in the rulebook at all. Because if you didn't have, for instance, like certain rules, you would have really silly in-game experiences like tanks just driving up walls, sitting on top of towers like 16 feet in the air, because the game state never explicitly says they can't without it being a certain type of terrain. And I understand partly why they've done that is they wanted people to use common sense, obviously. Like that's if you ever want to ask any game designer what they wish the most that players that played any of their games did, it would be that they follow that rule of like, well, why don't you and your opponent have a conversation and think about what makes the most sense in any given situation, and then do that. If that was like a rule that was somehow enforceable in gaming, that would be amazing. But it's just not. Like it's never going to happen. And to keep the rules to a certain length, they've obviously cut out a lot of the general rules for terrain that were in like the last 6 editions of 40K. And what that's kind of resulted in now is this like free for all where you almost don't want to use terrain. And if you use a GW terrain kit, it's fine. But for the most part, like I think especially in a tournament environment where terrain is actually a premium luxury for the tournament organizer, because he has to make potentially hundreds of pieces of terrain. You might only be playing games on 4 or 5 pieces of terrain on a 6-foot table, in which case it's almost going to impact your gameplay not at all. And that's going to lead to very specific ways the game's played, because you just can't hide. You know, like let's say you're playing an opponent who's just throwing shots at you, and there's literally nowhere on the board you can go where you can get a line of sight of them, because you know it's the only thing on the table are like some woods that don't block line of sight, some hills that don't block line of sight, and a couple of ruins that are peppered full of like holes, so it doesn't block line of sight either. And he's just throwing buckets of dice at you for the entire game. Well, that inherently then affects the gameplay experience, right? So I think that terrain rules are important. I think what's more important is either writing in you and your opponent, writing in some kind of a social parameters agreement where you and your opponent have to have some kind of conversation about how it works, or just understanding that if you're going to write rules a certain way, then the game is inherently going to be played a certain way, and that's going to affect the majority of how it gets played. So that's, I think, my first sort of like thought on it. And then my last kind of thought on it is never underestimate how terrain can affect your sort of like your overall like I guess meta in a game. So I have this theory, for instance, with Infinity. Let's come back to Infinity for a second, where it has one of the harshest entry curves in any miniature war game. Not because of the rules of the game or any of the mechanics that are built in, which I think are completely fine, but because there isn't like a big flashing red label on it. They do an okay job of this in the N3 rulebook, but there isn't like a big flashing warning sign on it that just says, do not play this game on a standard miniature wargaming table. Because if you do, it just breaks, right? Like if you were to just to go to like the average 4-foot 40k board and put two Infinity armies down next to each other and try and play a game, the game would be over in like the first turn, and whoever went first was probably dead because they would just walk into the open and they'd either dice their opponent or they get shot by the entire opponent's army, and guys would just be dying left and right. And so if people made that mistake, they would have a false impression of the game based on their one experience, right? And so as a rules designer, you kind of have to be super aware of the intended way that your game is going to be played. And I think Crossbow's done a very good job in the last little while of starting to like make that a big feature of explaining the game. And their starter sets are 100% geared towards making sure you don't try the game the wrong way by giving you terrain. Like they even package terrain with most of their starter sets, and they've made affordable terrain available to people so that they don't make this mistake and they don't get a false read on the game. I think that 40k, without some type of a like, hey, here's how you should probably set up a table, might fall into that. It might get to the place where like these shooting armies with like massive amounts of Overwatch, you can literally never get to them. Like if you've got some type of a close combat army, it's just not viable anymore, really. Might become problematic. And then when Games Workshop will probably react to that is when it starts to affect sales. If certain things just purely aren't selling anymore, and that's probably not going to be a problem for them because they do sell most of their miniatures based on aesthetic and not based on rules. But rules will eventually creep into why things do or don't sell. If the aesthetics aren't particularly cool and like push into it, it'll get changed. And then you got the extreme side of that where you've got like games like Warmachine where there's an entire industry now around making 2D tables for it. And proxy bases, you don't have to actually use your miniatures because they get in the way and stuff like that. That I think is very interesting because again, if you're like the average gamer walking to a gaming store and you've never seen Warmachine before, let's say you've been living on the moon for the last 10 years, you never see Warmachine, and you walk into a gaming store where you see effectively just like discs being moved around on a mat with like pictures of terrain on it, that you might not even think it's a miniature war game. Like you might not even know what it is. And you can put up pictures of like games from all over the place that they don't look like a war game really to me. They look like people that are playing a very spread out board game, if that makes sense. I'd like to just grab a picture. If I was to do a Google search, let's just see if I can do this right now. Let's just do a Google search. If I go to Google and I pull up just Warmachine and see what we see. Google.com, just go to the image search for Google.com and pull up Warmachine, like being played, and see what I can find. Google.com. Why do you keep taking me back to Gmail? I don't want to go to Gmail. I want to go to Google. It's my autofill because I'm using Chrome. It just thinks that every time I put in Google, I want to go to Gmail, which is not what I want. Let's share this and see if you guys can actually see it. Change source. Let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to go to here. And then I got to add this. And show you my desktop. And let's see if I can do this right now. Yep, that works. I'm just going to go window. And we're going to select a window. And that window is going to be Google Chrome. Because I wasn't planning to do this. Otherwise I'd have this all like set up already. Let's go over there. Yep, there it is. Hooray! And that's what we're going to add. Done. Chrome. Okay. Done. So we're going to add Chrome. Doop. And then you guys need to be able to hear me. So let's add an audio source, which is going to be this. And that should be it. And let's turn off that. And then let's go see me. And now you guys can see Chrome. And let's see what comes up as like the first one. Like let's just see what Frosty's are the things I've been doing. Let's go with Warmachine and Hordes. And let's just look at images. Battle report. Let's try that and see what comes up. Go to images. and just see what it looks like. Here we go. Perfect. Boom. So there it is. So and they're actually using 3D terrain. That's really neat. So there's a game being played, and they've got some zone markers and stuff, and it's being played, and that looks like a miniature wargaming to me. Like, that looks like people are playing a war game. That's awesome. And let's just see if I'm right or wrong. So here we go. Here's some other ones. View image. Can't really make that any bigger. But there you go. So there's all 2D terrain. So that's all 2D terrain, and a gaming mat. And that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, at least the miniatures are painted. Like, the miniatures are painted there, but it doesn't necessarily look like a war game to me. Like, it's not. It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't have that same like level of immersion. Here's another one. View image. Right, there we go. Some 2D terrain and some 3D terrain being used. That's pretty awesome right there. Good job by them. And then here we go. Here's another one. Not really sure what the red squares are. that's more what I was expecting to find when I Googled this. But yeah, so you see we kind of get a mixed bag here. Here's another example. You know, like a whole pile of just like 2D markers and stuff. And so that's, to me, I don't know, like, this looks like a war game to me. I'm totally cool with this. When I see something like this, I'm just not, I don't know, I'm not drawn in. Like, it kind of breaks the immersion for me. And that's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a rough thing. So let's jump back over to that shot. And then you guys can actually see me again. Hey, there I am. I don't know. It's an interesting question because I think terrain's really important, but I understand why it's also important to not be using terrain for other people. So I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think from a company's point of view, though, you do have to realize that every time someone walks in and sees your game being played, that's the first impression that lots of potential customers get of the way your game's being played. So if your game's only really looking one way, there's a potentiality that it might not look as impressive to the customer as if it's being played another way. And so I think that's just something that you as a company have to be aware of when you're writing rules is what's the experience that playing my game should project to people, and how will they perceive my game from watching it be played when I can't control that happening, when other people are doing it, right? So like, one of the things I've noticed is when you go to like an Infinity tournament and all the terrain's painted and stuff like that, it's a really impressive like event just to see 10 and like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I run Infinity tournaments and I've got 10 tables of painted terrain. Like, just to see 10 tables of like 4x4 Infinity terrain like laid out is pretty impressive, because I can't think of another event that you'd run for miniature wargaming right now that would have like that detailed a terrain setup for every single gaming table. You know what I mean? For most miniature war games, you're talking about 5 or 6 pieces of terrain. There's like 20 to 30 pieces of terrain on each gaming table for an Infinity tournament. And there's a real like wow factor to that, especially for a game where you're only playing with like 10 or 15 models. But there's this wow of like you're playing in this little metropolis almost every single time it's played, versus the pictures you guys just saw, you know what I mean, of an open table with like some flat pieces on it. What if you didn't know anything about those two games, but you walked in and watched them both being played, which one might suck you in more? You know what I mean? Just by the visual experience, not by knowing anything about the games or hearing people talking or any of that stuff, just the visual actuality of it. Which one are you more likely to go and walk over to? I think it'd be a really interesting like litmus test for recruitment in wargaming, is how does that affect people. And Games Workshop's been really good about having like big giant terrain pieces being added to their like sales collection, because again, I think they understand that that's what draws people in. More questions. Oh wait, we need to go. Actually, why am I doing more questions from the mailbag? I need to go back to the chat and look at some questions, because you guys were asking some earlier. Ash, do you have any thoughts on community building outside of a single store? Players tend to travel between a half dozen stores in my area, but the store owners see one another's competition for obvious reasons. A bunch of local club organizers have gotten together and trying to form a local tourney event circuit, but we're getting stonewalled by store owners who don't like to share customers. I'll tell you one thing, that's not a unique phenomenon. That happens here in Ontario, in my local area. That happens all over the place, where I think a lot of store owners are very precious about their customers, and they're afraid that if their customers experience someone else, they might lose that money. And running a hobby store is it's a very gutsy thing, right? You're running in a very niche market, and so every customer is very important to you. And so there's understandably people can be very nervous about potentially sharing customers or losing customers to other businesses. So I can first of all, that emotional reaction, I think you just kind of have to accept and understand, and you can't get mad about it because those people are already in a tippy environment. You know what I mean? An environment where they're always worried about sales. For you trying to build a community, I think the onus then becomes how you get it outside of shops, where it's something that doesn't make the shops feel threatened and isn't about selling things to the customers as much as it's about giving the customers a reason to go back to those stores and buy stuff. And if you pitch it that way from the very beginning, you might get a better reception. So organizing an event, and here's my tips for that, because I'm actually in the process of thinking about organizing a Dark Age event for August here in Ontario. You need to shop a venue. Get yourself an off-site venue if you can. If you're marketing this towards grown-ups, or if it's an all-ages thing, you have to make that decision early on. If you're marketing towards grown-ups, make sure it's a venue that's comfortable. Potentially, alcohol can be served in. You know what I mean? If that's your thing, but where people can basically go and relax and play games for a day in like a comfortable environment. So things like AC, whatever, all that stuff's important. Price it out. And then look at availability, and then try and find a date, and then you're looking at then collecting interest. You know what I mean? Try and do pre-sales if you can, and with the idea that if you do pre-sales of tickets before you book the venue, or if you cover the venue yourself and then book the venue, if it doesn't fill up or sell out, then you just return the money. Lots of ways of doing that. It's going to be whatever's comfortable for you. And then you have to pitch it to the event or the store owners to get them to advertise it. And the idea here is, hey, I'm blah. I represent this community in the area. What I'd really like to do, because I see you stock the product for this game, is advertise my event. I'm not affiliated with any store. All I'm trying to do is give you a reason to sell more stuff to people. And I'm going to do this blah times a year and get them to form a team from your store to come down and play in the event. And so my goal here is more people start playing this game in the area. I just want them to come to play in an event and have it be off-site, because we can host X number of people, like 50 people in this event or whatever it is. Could be big, could be small. And I want the local store owners on board, because the more stuff you guys sell, the more popular the game becomes, the more players I get to play against, right? So I'm a hobby champion, a big fan of this company, and blah. And that tends to get it sidesteps whatever their fear is if you pitch it as a way of, hey, I'd like to help you make more money. How can I help you make more money? This isn't about trying to get somebody to go to another store. It's about trying to get people to just play this game more. I'm already booking this hall and absorbing all the costs for this event. All I want from you is for you to make more money. And that means you get to have customer conversations, advertise the event, use the event as like a final stage in like a league or something. If you're going to run a league, like whatever you're doing in the store, I want that to help you get that snowball route going and augment your own personal sales and stuff. And so that's my pitch advice. If you're going to pitch it to local store owners, and some of them are still going to say no, some are still going to do whatever, they're going to ask you weird questions like, well, what store do you normally play in? And then my answer would be my basement, because I don't play in stores because I'm a grown-up. Can I drink here? No? Then why would I play here? Like, I'm a grown-ass man. I have a gaming table. Sorry. Like, that's the irony of that statement, right? But yeah, no, I think that's just forecast in your head. They might try and pick your brain. They might see if you're a plant from somewhere. Depends on how paranoid these game owners are, and some can be very paranoid. But if you go into it with the idea that you're just trying to make these people more money, you'll hopefully get them on board and get them to the point where they're gonna want to actually like back you and then build your event, because there's so many events every year that make store owners money that started as these small events and then grew into big events. Like Adepticon used to be in a guy's basement, and now it's a major sales driver for literally every store that sells Games Workshop products, whatever, in the entire Chicago area every year. Getting ready for Adepticon is like a thing that drives the wargaming economy in Chicago, and actually even in the United States. Like, it has a knock-on effect across the United States for the entire year. And so if you just point at that and be like, if it gets big, this is what it does. Like, this is, you can make thousands of dollars in sales if you're the local guy. Plus, eventually you could come and be a vendor, blah, 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 blah. Like, just supporting this now requires no effort from you except for saying, like, hey, here's a great party that's going to happen. Why don't we build and paint some stuff, and you can buy some stuff until that takes place. So, yeah, step around them, go after their desire to make money, and hopefully you'll be able to do a little bit better, hopefully breaking down those walls. Talking about 2D terrain a little bit, people are making some questions. Dave says, I was asked 3D versus 2D question last night. I wonder if that's a survey going on. Maybe, or it might just be on people's brains. The terrain is, like I said earlier, it's a really big like question point right now in 8th edition 40K, and so I think it's on a lot of people's minds. Owen's just played in 2 back-to-back tournaments where his guard army, which is, of course, you guys have probably seen on my channel already, is full of all kinds of fun, crazy things that have been cooked up in his lizard brain, but very much augmented by the fact that he's playing on almost 0 terrain when he's playing these events, because they don't have a lot of terrain in these tournaments, right? There's like 4 to 6 pieces of terrain. None of it really blocks line of sight. The first time he went with the Hellhammer, he didn't even take the Hellhammer this time, and still did great. But like it's because things never lose effectiveness because the terrain's never affecting the game. And so I think that's the more people are playing this game, the more terrain questions are coming out, because you're just hitting a point where you're like, I don't really know what to do here. Like the rulebook just says I should be able to drive my tank and sit on top of this tower. It's an intact tower. There's no rules for intact towers. So technically you can just, but like, I mean, common sense, obviously, no, it can't do that. It can't drive a wall. It can't just sit up there. But it can. You know, like if someone's getting an argument with you, you didn't have a conversation before the game starts. And it's these conversations that are uncomfortable, I think, that's driving that thinking about terrain in this huge lump of the market right now. Matt Lagori says, I wonder if this has anything to do with the bringing back of Warmachine and X-Wing players to 40K. Could very well be. I mean, when people repatriate, obviously what they're used to and what they're getting are going to be things that are going to clash. You know what I mean? Like, so with 40K, I think that's, I think we can agree at this point that it's brought back a lot of players that haven't played in a long time, because I see that comment all the time. It's entirely possible that that's been an effect. People that are used to sort of like swimming in one fish tank are warming up to a new one. And I don't know if it's as drastic as it could be. It obviously would be very different if like it was like from Warmachine to Infinity. I actually don't. I think we play. It's funny. I think we play with far more terrain when we play 40K, and even the guys that like Mini Wargaming play with far more terrain than the average 40K game usually has being played like out in the wilds. And terrain has much more of an impact then versus the way the game is normally being played, because like I said, the average gaming table, if you walk into a GW store, your local game store, or whatever, probably does not have as much terrain as we use in our battle reports and stuff. And so there's going to be a much bigger sort of like impact on that stuff. Anthony says, this is a pretty big reason why I fell out of love with X-Wing. The local community cared about was testing out the top builds on Vassal. Yeah, that's I couldn't do that, man. I couldn't do that. I mean, I completely understand the success of X-Wing. X-Wing was a perfect storm of like the way that the models were approached and how easy it was to get into, and a perfect IP for the model type that it was. And I think it's beautiful in that it is so easy to play. But I think that its longevity is based on how long do you feel connected to it, you know what I mean? And if it breaks down into a more Magic the Gathering style game where you're playing, or even, what's the other one? Android, any of these games where you're just playing to win, you're trying to figure out top builds and stuff like that, then you've lost the point of doing it with miniatures, and you might as well just be doing it with cards or counters or whatever, because it's not, it's no longer about the experience of the immersion of sitting and being drawn into something. It's about how fast can I remove your pieces, and whatever the optimum thing is, how can I do that? Benoit says, I have such an eclectic collection of terrain that spending some time defining the terrain is an automatic conversation with me. Oh yeah, obviously. Well, and the other thing is, like, we play when you play as many games as someone who's a fan of wargaming as opposed to like a particular wargame does, I think what happens is you're used to like rebooting your brain almost and trying to remember how everything interacts with terrain. Like, we had to have a conversation, Owen and I, the night we were finishing off the Seekers and Sanctuary Relic Blade campaign. We couldn't remember how climbing worked. And it's because like we've played so many games that how does climbing work? I don't remember. Like, is there a ladder? Is there not a ladder? And the point was that we're playing the watch for the like the signal fire mission, and the signal fire had to be on the highest point of the battlefield. So we were trying to like climb up a ruin. There was ladders in some places. There wasn't ladders in other places, and we had to go and look it up and remember how the train rules worked. And I think it's just you get in that habit, right? Because you realize, oh my god, this is the 7th different kind of game I've played this month. How does this work again? Matt Ligori says, this is one thing that would really make the Warmachine skirmish rules shine for me. Adding more terrain to the rules, more miniatures game, and less discourse. 100%. I am so stoked for that little skirmish game. I actually, funnily enough, I wrote a skirmish rule set for Warmachine back when I was at Mini Wargaming ages ago. That was about like baby warcasters, and like they would build a battle group, and like they had their little junk jack that like you bodge like bits and pieces onto. And they weren't quite even journeymen. So they started off with like their jack, and they could buy new arms for it and legs for it or whatever, and they could hire like individuals from their faction. And I would love to play like an official version of that, because I think that that's going to be awesome. And there's so many like great Warmachine models that I don't want to paint an army of, but I'd love to paint like 1 or 2 of that. Yeah, I'm jazzed for that. It's going to be really cool. Randy St. Denis, I love Infinity models and Infinity terrain. I just wish there were more people in London, Ontario that played. There's like 4 people. Hey man, I always hate to say this, but that's always you gotta be able to be willing to build your community. You know what I mean? There was, I think, 0 people playing Warmachine or playing Infinity in Niagara when I moved here, and there's like 10 or 15 probably now. They don't play regularly, but they own armies. You know what I mean? Like if I was to like say, hey, let's all get together and do something, they'd probably say yes. Like there's not a it's an if you build it, they will come thing. You know, like I think the more that you play a game and the more that you organize get-togethers and stuff, the more the social aspect drives the game. So there has to be like a hub and a community center. I wish I had time for more of that. Like when my kids are eventually both in school, I might have time to do something like run a gaming at a local gaming store, which I think would really drive a bunch of games in the area. You know what I mean? Like if I showed up with 3 tables of Infinity terrain every Thursday night somewhere, and everybody could just know that Thursday night at blah store you could show up and play Infinity. We'd have an Infinity community in like a month and a half, 2 months. But you have to have the time and the effort and be willing to do that. Apart from that, it's just when do you and your friends get together and play a game. So, yeah, I mean, games don't promote themselves. People promote games, and if you're passionate about something, you got to be willing to put it out there and try and get more people to play the game. So, for people playing in London, I think there's probably more than that. I've seen there's a Facebook group for London Infinity, I'm pretty sure, that had more than 4 people in it. So check that out maybe, because I think there was at least like 10. I just don't know where they all play. It's ships in the night, man. Like people are all in their basement. They probably all play the same game, but they never get together. It's that central location that brings people together. And Randy, if you live in London, like just come play me. Like, you're like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. Just jump on the 401 and come play me. Like come down for a week. I'll play some Infinity. Jan Smith says, I like where you use 3D terrain on top of 2D terrain, giving you the best of both worlds. Absolutely. I do that all the time in Guild Ball, because there are times where you want to move the terrain out of the way. Warmachine and Guild Ball, I do it all the time. I love the idea of it being a sub-in, because then you have at least, like, you don't just remove it completely. You have the ability to, like, if something's just in the way, you can twist it out of the way and move it. But it doesn't just dominate the table. Well, not dominate the table. It doesn't just reduce the table to, like, a footprint, basically. And some people have made some really cool products that I want to show off too, but I want to do it in such a way that I get the best of both worlds. So yeah, Guild Ball and Warmachine, you'll very often see me use 2D terrain as the footprint for the 3D terrain that's sitting on top of it, and then we only remove it if it's relevant. Also, Yuan says, Courseplay really nails it by bringing out that cardboard terrain. Hopefully they will bring out more different cardboard terrain in the future. I almost guarantee you'll see that. They've done one for almost every faction so far. They've done the Yu Ching stuff just recently for the Red Veil box. There's I guess like the generic one, or maybe you could call it the Pano one, is the Mototronica terrain pack. There's the Hephaestus one for Aleph, and then there's the was it Comanche base? Apache base? No, Comanche base is the Warsenal stuff. I think maybe it's Apache, Fort Apache or something like that. The one that's for Ariadne. But that leaves tons of other factions that haven't done yet. I mean, really cool to see a Nomad one with all kinds of like graffiti and tags on it to be really cool. Obviously, there's Hack Islam's another option. You can have all kinds of cool like medical based stuff. There's just tons of options there, and I bet that you'll see the next 2-player starters that they do, because right now you can get 4 of the human factions in 2-player starters. So you can get the Nomads in one, the It's Nomads and Pano in the first one, Hack and Yuching in the second one, which means you've got Aleph left. Aleph and the Space Aliens. They could potentially be the other one. So Aleph, Toha, and Combine are like the three that don't have a two-player star system, like representing them in the game. And it'd be super cool if like you had like the Aleph fighting the combined army, you know what I mean, in one. You could have like some really cool Aleph terrain, or even some really cool combined army terrain, like some weird alien whatever. Well, I think keeping it all human oriented makes more sense because the aliens don't have planets; they're like an invasion force, and the humans all have like, you know, their own sort of like a little style of the way that they live that you combine to make a really cool looking infinity table. So yeah, I hope they do. I think they will. I mean, I suspect that they're super aware that the more accessible and easy to get terrain is for playing Infinity on, it looks like it fits an Infinity table, the better it's going to be for them to have that barrier removed to trying out the game and getting it right. Tim Barry says, have you looked into Savage Core by Lucid Eye? They just released a rulebook. You can get the miniatures from Warlord. I have not. Let's go look at it right now. Savage Core by Warlord Games. That sounds like the kind of thing that I would like. Savage Core Warlord Games. I'm going to bring it up here. Oh, is this the one with the... Yeah, this is the Chromag one. This is so cool. Hang on. You guys are going to like this. This is the one that's all like... it's all like hunters and Amazons and stuff. And cavemen. Yeah, Chromags. And then you've got like the time travelers. That's awesome. Let's look at these. I like these a lot. Yeah, it's like time traveling dude. There's a time traveling Nazi and like a adventurer chick and like a couple of barbarian looking people. Oh my god, this is pretty great. I haven't looked into it, but it looks hilarious and it looks very pulpy. There's a company in Canada called Pulp Minis that makes this kind of stuff. Oh my god, it's Caesar. Check it out. It's full on Caesar from Planet of the Apes. I love it. It's Caesar right there. That's so cool. Planet of the Apes. If I can play as evil monkeys, maybe I'll check this out. Oh yeah, Roman Legionnaires. Like lots of lost, like sort of time traveling heroes and stuff. That's Black Powder right there. Savage Core. That's really cool. Yeah, I haven't looked at them yet. It's weird that... Okay, so that's weird. So like that's a standard sort of like Warlord base that guy's standing on. But then those are lip bases on the Amazons. What's going on, Warlord? You don't do lip bases. You do like the old school. These are lip bases too. Oh my gosh. What's going on, Warlord? That's so unlike you. You don't do lip bases. Lip bases are for other companies. Yep. Simian Alpha. That's totally just straight up Caesar from Planet of the Apes. Jaguar Tribal Chief and Son from Lucid Eye. That's neat. I like that Warlord's doing this crazy stuff. Yeah, just... Oh, so they're Atlanteans. So they're from Atlantis. That's neat. This has kind of got like this Conan and the Black Coast sort of feel to it. Annalisa Kircher, Lost Explorer. Yeah, so this is like maybe taking place in like the 1930s, but it's kind of like a Lost World thing. So these Chromags are like on an island somewhere. Kill me, Smalls. They're on some like lost island somewhere. And the model's really nice. I'd actually buy the Chromags just as like barbarians for like Frostgrave or something. They're really cool. That's awesome. No, thanks for pointing it out to me. I think maybe I'd seen it like very briefly as like a newsletter or something from Warlord, but I hadn't actually looked at it. And that's pretty super rad. I'm jazzed about that. What else we got here? Jan Smith, Tim Berry, thanks. I've seen the minis, but didn't realize there was a rule set to go with them. You can get directly from Lucid Eye. Anthony Lee said, we had some local tourney at one of our game stores. Some guy showed up with 2 Hellforged Falchions and Magnus the Red. Average of 5 pieces of terrain per table. So fun. That sounds obnoxious. How can you have 2 Hellforged Falchions if you can only... Because aren't they relics? You can't do that. You have to have at least... You have to have more of the non-relic versions. Like, you have to have more non-relic super heavies than you had relics. And I think Hellforged Falchions are relics. They're relic equipment. That might not have been a legal army list. I'm not 100% sure. That sounds crazy, but I mean, that's where the game's going, right? So we'll see. Anthony says, don't get me wrong, it was a great event. There were lots of crazy builds. It just underscored how out of my competitive play has become. Yeah, I think that's, well, again, that might more be a question of, because tournaments are tournaments, right? And it's funny because I for my own interest, I joined this group on Facebook called Competitive 40K, and they have a whole laundry list of almost like social agreements about how do we even talk about this. And it was the weirdest thing. I actually had to answer a questionnaire to join the Facebook group. I didn't even know you could do that on Facebook. If you could like screen people to join the group, I had to answer questions about 40K to get in, and luckily I knew enough about 40K that I was like accepted. But like there's a big laundry list of like a social contract almost on how you have to treat other people talking about competitive 40K. And it was things like you can't call it cheesy, you can't, if it's allowed by the rules, it's allowed by the rules. If it's good, it's good. So we're trying to have a objective conversation about what would the best thing be, not an intention or any kind of like boundaries of social constructs about how the game is supposed to be played, which I found really interesting because it almost felt like inside of this group of people that are trying to play competitively, there was even these sub factions of people that they wanted to do stuff, but they were putting false parameters on themselves. And there's that book by Serlin, which is about Street Fighter, actually, about scrub mentality. And what they were doing is they were screening for scrubs. And the scrub in fighting games in Street Fighter would I don't know if you ever read Serlin's book, but it's a book on competitive gameplay basically. But the scrub would basically, he would limit himself with tactics that he felt for whatever socially constructed reason were dishonorable or not correct or not right. And you can read the whole book actually online. What is it called? Serlin Street Fighter. Let me just look it up right now because I know this. Book. What's his book called? Playing to Win, Becoming a Champion. That's his book. Serlin.net, game design. It's a game design book. Introducing the Scrub is the section, yeah. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. If you've never read this before, this is a great book about playing to win and about like mental stuff. And like how you basically like approach gameplay in your head. Relic rule doesn't exist for Chaos. Okay, well that makes sense. So there's no relics in Chaos. I guess that kind of makes sense because the Chaos Space Marines are all relics themselves. So I guess they wouldn't have like the same. I guess like, well, they would have rarity of, but I don't know how I feel about that now. That doesn't make. I mean, but then that's my scrub mentality, right? I'm limiting myself mentally. But yeah, no. So introducing the scrub, it's the intermediates guide. Introducing the scrub. It's about social constructs. When you don't understand this stuff, it's very interesting because it's actually probably social constructs inside your own head, making it so that you don't want to play the game that way. And so you can very much, it's funny because you can very much see that difference between myself and between Owen. Is Owen very much plays the way that Serlin describes in this book, which is whatever the quickest path to the result is, his brain makes like logic leaps on the way there. Whereas mine gets lost in the path of my imagination, right? So I'm imagining the actual like action taking place, and wouldn't it be cool if, and blah, blah, blah. And so I take these like long roads to get to like effectiveness, whereas Owens just skips all those steps and goes right to the direct path of like, well, if this is good, is 20 of these the best? If no, then go back to next thing and find something that might be better. If this is good, then is 20 things of this the best? And he'll just jump to the end each time until he finds the thing he thinks is best. And so it's interesting because you will probably feel disconnected from that if you don't, I guess, if you're just not wired that way. You know what I mean? So like I think that's you might be able to train it out of yourself, but emotionally you might not get the result you want, and that means that like going to tournaments might just not be something that you enjoy. I very often had where I've not prepared myself appropriately for going to a tournament or even just an event, and not even just necessarily as like a competitor, but even as a spectator. And by the end of it, I'm just like, why are they even doing this? Like this just isn't the point of any of this. I had this at a Horus Heresy event actually, probably 4 or 5 months ago. And it was because the Horus Heresy events, to me, they were trying to design a narrative event that was like capturing the heresy and about like the storyline of the heresy. But then someone showed up whose intent was just to purely win every single game that they could. And they showed up without even a single Forge World model. I think they just took an army of pure like Questoris Knights. And not just like Questoris Knights, but like whatever the most stripped down 7th edition knight was, so they could have as many of them as they could. in the 2,000 point gameplay or whatever it was, and they just tabled everybody like turn 3, because like people are showing up with like big bolter squads on foot and like whatever the cool forge minis they have are, and this guy just like Rochambeaued each and every one of them, and like by like through turn 3, because you can't do a lot to fight knights when you're taking guys with bolters on foot, right? Like they're just rapid fire, and it didn't matter if it was the cheapest knight, because they're just using templates in 7th edition, which don't miss. They just scatter a little bit and just pounding all of these guys into the dirt. And I remember watching the event and just being like, I don't get it. Like, and I get like, it was just one of these things, not like the other thing, where like a bunch of guys showed up to do one thing and one guy showed up to do something else. Yeah, it wasn't probably just him. It was probably a couple guys showed up to do something else. And the event just kind of like fell over to that one side because it couldn't help itself, you know what I mean? And it was about intent. It was about sort of like the whatchamacallit, where did these people start off when they came? The scrubs showed up to have a good time and tell a story. The winners showed up to win, and they did, and they took the quickest path to victory. Philip J. Mead says, if I need to win, I play my orcs because they always win. That's the best thing about orcs, is orcs always win. Even when they lose, they just come back later and they have another go. And that's been the age-old adage for orcs forever, is when they win, they win. When they lose, they lose. When they win, they win. And when they lose, they win, because it means they've had a good fight. They get to come back and have another go, which is fantastic. Yeah, I highly recommend the book by Edward Serlin. Even if you don't want to be the winner, it helps you to understand, I think, the people that might have that mentality and why they behave the way they do. They're not being dicks. They're just trying to get to the end result of victory through the most efficient way possible, and they're skipping steps that you might not be skipping, or they are unfettered by the social constructs that you might have in your head that's preventing you from winning a game, or from playing a game that's the way that they play a game. Which is okay on both sides. It's okay that you enjoy the gameplay you enjoy, and it's okay that they enjoy the gameplay they enjoy. And so my recommendation then is just don't play those people. Play in your basement with your friends. Play narrative games. I had a ton of fun recently. I was getting actually kind of bummed on match play for Age of Sigmar, and I started playing a Path to Glory campaign with my buddy Mike, and I was super jazzed about that. Path to Glory was awesome because it was full games of Age of Sigmar, but with a narrative bent and with some like progression and stuff too tossed into it, and it was fantastic. That's actually what these Vanguard Hunters are for. This is my next unit I'm adding to my Path to Glory army for for Stormcast, and it was awesome. And he's playing Bone Splitters, and like we played 2 games, but each game felt like it was important. Each game felt like something was happening afterwards. The missions were really cool, and it was me getting ready for when the new Path to Glory book drops. Those videos will come out, and we'll be ready for that book in our next games. We'll use the new book stuff. So we were using the stuff from the General's Handbook to get started, and then we're going to go on and use the new stuff as we go forward. Yeah. So yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's sort of playing with people that want to win and playing the way you want to play, and finding out actually what kind of hobbyist you are is kind of like a personal journey for everybody. And the longer that you are in a hobby like this, I think, and the more you ask yourself those questions of like, well, if I really enjoyed this, why did I enjoy it? And if I didn't enjoy it at all, why didn't I enjoy it? You end up with a rounder hobby, a better appreciation for why other people do things, and more fulfilled by the time that you spend doing the hobby, I think, as you get older. Especially like if you're in a boat like I am, I've been doing this for about 30 years now. Most of my friends, my close friends, have been doing it for almost as long, or they've been in the industry, they've been doing it for just as long. You don't stay in a hobby like this without becoming really effective at spending your time on things you enjoy. It's I think a sort of testimony to your own sort of like self-improvement in a hobby like this, if you spend the time to realize, what do I like, what don't I like, and then what haven't I tried that I might like, or what have I tried a long time ago that may have changed that I can go back and try again. Because like, for instance, I hadn't gone to an actual tournament in a long time and played a game, and going to Immortals at Kumani Expo was a lot of fun. Not because I was hoping I would win or play, but I got to hang out with a bunch of people who are all really passionate about one thing for a weekend basically. And I hadn't done that in a long time. I hadn't done that since I worked for Workshop, basically, when we'd run events for people. And I was an organizer, not a participant. And I thought that it really refreshed me, it rejuvenated me on that kind of stuff. Same with going to Adepticon last year, or this year, in March. It feels like it was forever ago now. And running the Frostgrave campaign weekends. It was a ton of fun. And it was so great to, like, see a bunch of people show up ready to enjoy something and all go through something together and enjoy it as they did. So, like, that's, to me, I was really fulfilled by that. I didn't play any games almost that entire weekend. I think I played one game against Zach Moore and his filthy core. But I didn't feel like I missed out on anything because I got to watch a bunch of people have a great time doing something that I'd helped put together. And so that actually led to me wanting to do this Dark Age event here in Toronto, hopefully in August. It led to me, I've been volunteering my time to run tournaments and stuff like that, and I've enjoyed that for Lords of War. I'm gonna run a tournament at the Tabletop Gaming Expo at the end of, and actually in 2 weeks. No, next weekend. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yeah, it's in 2 weeks. And that's like, no, it's next weekend. Yeah, it's not this coming weekend, the weekend after. And that's I think that's just like a powerful thing. So the more you do like things in the hobby, just spend some time reflecting on it, because the more you reflect on it, I think the better your time gets spent later on, especially later in life where like your free time is going like this. And every minute counts. You might not have another minute to enjoy playing war games. So do it. Anthony Lee played a few rounds of AOS Skirmish recently. It was a great narrative experience. Highly recommend it. Can't wait to see what the new Path to Glory ends up being like. Yeah, I'm stoked for it too. I've been told that the Hinterlands book, or community version of Skirmish, is really good too. I've looked through it briefly. It looks like it's a little more detailed than Skirmish. If you like Skirmish, check that out. Because Skirmish, once I played through the Skirmish book and I played all 6 missions narratively, I didn't feel like a real like urge to do it again. Whereas the Hinterlands one that I've looked at now, there's a little bit more detail in like how guys progress and how guys live and die, and I might run that next just to kind of like go a little bit deeper in that Skirmish experience. Philip J. Mead says giving back is way more fulfilling than always taking. Absolutely, that's absolutely true. I think that's just a life lesson in general. But like when you get to throw a great party, there's a great feeling about that, about having a bunch of people in a room enjoying something that you helped like participated in putting together, or you helped create, or whatever it is. That's a really like rewarding feeling, and so I highly recommend that too. Which I think dovetails actually into what I was talking about earlier with Infinity, with like trying to organize an Infinity Gaming night out in London. Is there's some definite merit to doing it for yourself, where you get more opponents, you get more people to play with, but there's also merit in just doing it because you'll feel watching people enjoy what you're doing is like just almost fulfilling in of itself. Kids are the best free time killer in the world. That's true. They are not, well, they're not a free time killer, I find, so much as they are because here's the thing is like I don't feel like the time I spend with my kids is killing my free time when I'm doing things with them that I'm getting to experience stuff for like the first time with them. You know what I mean? So like taking my kids swimming, like watching them like go like run around and hunt caterpillars or see waterfalls, like hike in the woods. I never feel like that's interfering with my free time because I'm getting to experience things through them for the first time again. Same with like watching them go like play with their friends. Like just watching my daughter. Oh my God. So you guys like my daughter because she always interrupts this stuff. My daughter dealt with her first bully on the playground last week. This kid came up to her who's probably like, she's 3, she's going on 4. She's probably like, she'll be 4 in October. So she's 3 3/4 almost 4. And this kid who was probably like 6 or 7, like had like a good foot on her. And he was like probably about, like a third again her size. Came up to her and was like, he said something to her like, get out of the way, baby, like baby, like she was a baby. And she just like squared up to him and went, I'm not a baby, I'm a big girl. And he just like totally backed off. And I didn't do anything. I just stood there and like let her deal with this. And it was the most proud I've ever been of my daughter in my entire life. Because she totally like squared up to this kid and just like chased him off. It was a totally rewarding experience. And that's to me, that's why it's not like a free time killer. Like you get to watch your kids do these things and navigate all these social things and like have like whatchamacallit, an awesome sort of like first view of everything, so you get to see it again for the first time yourself. So, you know, like your kid's learning how to swim, you know, facing down a bully for the first time. Like obviously I would have jumped in if like it got silly, but like she totally like dropped gloves and didn't hesitate at all. She just squared up to him and was like like two-thirds his size, and just faced him down, and it was fantastic. Super proud of my girl. We're getting close to the end. We got 15 minutes left. Let's throw out some more questions, and I'll go back to the mailbag and see what's there. Oh, Mr. Mailbag, you are always so full of questions. Survey Monkey. Unfortunately, all of the Survey Monkey pages got closed down as I started looking for the Andrew Sterling thing, and also all those pictures. Over here. And we'll do a couple more of these as we jump in. What's my opinion? Is an interesting one. Okay. There's two interesting ones actually. So let's do these. No Name asks, what would you like to see by way of campaign support for Infinity or Dark Age? Closer to Shadow War Armageddon or Mordheim or Necromunda? So what it looks like you're asking is, would I rather it was sort of chunky and, you know, had like some depth, like the Necromunda and Mordheim one, where there's some like pre-game and post-game activity, you know, like a more like expanded damage table and stuff, or more like Shadow War, where you get a perk and you get like some potential danger for your guys going forward, but it's not super, you know, there's not the same level of like threat basically, or like between game narrative. I would like to see it for Infinity, and I'd like to see it be more of, if I was actually to pick a third option, more like Path to Glory. So I think Path to Glory handles giving you a reason to like play more games narratively really well, and it also handles the making guys better aspect of it. Because what you don't want to do when you're playing a game is you don't want to limit what people can choose. You want to use whatever models they want. And the struggle there with things like Shadow War, Necromunda, or Mordheim is you're always creating your own heroes. You want to have the option to do that, to use like unnamed people, give them a name, and have them get better. But if someone really likes named characters, like if someone really wants to use Shinobu, or wants to use, you know, Bipandra, the greatest doctor in all of Pan-Oceania, who's killed more people than polio, then you should be allowed to. You know what I mean? Like, and so that system of like, you either get, let's say you get some coin to spend on new units, which is what one of the things Path to Glory. You get one of your unit upgrades gets better, so like one of your like Joe Blows basically, or like a group of Joe Blows will get better, or you get your character can get better, your general or whatever can get better. So that could be a named character, that could be like an unnamed character you give it a name to, whatever. That to me, that's enough to get me invested in the models I've built and painted and excited to play my next game, and then give me some really cool scenarios that are like a puzzle box each time. Because I think Infinity really shines when you're in a mid-range level of gameplay, so let's say 200 to 300 points, and every scenario, so for instance, we got it wrong, but it doesn't really matter because it was still the same sort of thing. Like Killbox, which was in Strikes on Wotan, where you had a central room that you're trying to hold at the end, but the room is defended by third-party sentry bots that you're both trying to get around while you're fighting each other. Those are brilliant scenarios because they make the game less about just fighting your opponent. You're going to have to fight your opponent, but you're also trying to unlock a puzzle at the same time. And so more puzzle scenarios, I think, combined with a little bit of tension and like advancement on your army side, where like your construction can get better and you can get small sort of like perks and upgrades as you go. That to me would be perfect for a thing like Infinity or Dark Age. I think both of those things would be perfect, because Dark Age is also peppered with special characters and you don't want to say no, don't use them. You want to give people a reason to be okay with using them and to keep going and make them better, hopefully. So yeah, so I think that's that would be my thing. More of a Path to Glory thing where there is some reason to do it, but the big key feature that has to be done is give me scenarios that make me want to play the next game. They make me excited to play the next game. And the puzzle box thing, I think, is a whatchamacallit, a good analogy, because as soon as I played Kill Cage, I was like, please put this in ITS. Please give me more scenarios like this that that drive the game towards this like problem solving mechanic where I feel like I'm playing like a level in Deus Ex, you know, like where there's a million ways I could solve this problem. Well, old Deus Ex, maybe not new Deus Ex. There's a million ways I could solve this problem, and I'm excited to figure out what in my toolkit is I'm going to figure out to do it with, because I think Infinity really shines when that's what the game is being pushed towards, is this almost cyberpunk feeling of like trying to do these like covert actions. Yeah, 100%. That's what I would do. And oops. This guy's name is Whaleboner, 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 and he asks, that's a card in Exploding Kittens. And we had to, my 75-year-old father read the Whaleboner card out loud, actually, when we were playing Exploding Kittens, which was the highlight of my Christmas almost. They ask, is there anything about skirmish rule systems that you particularly enjoy, any features that really turn you off? So I really, when I play skirmish games, I think that the thing that I enjoy the most is that I get to do a bunch of world building in a scale that lets me start from scratch each time. So whenever I start any skirmish games, like for instance, right now I've got some Osprey skirmish games bubbling in my head that I want to get to that I haven't gotten to yet. Just because there's been this whole Q1, Q2 in Wargaming has been so peppered with releases. Like there's been so many big releases between 40K and Shadow War. Like all this stuff has come out in the last 6 months, and that's been just keeping up with that has been immense. Like the Strikes on Wotan campaign for Infinity, I painted a ton of stuff for, painted terrain for, built new terrain for, all that stuff. But I want to get to more of these little games, and the joy for me in doing that is that I get to build a little collection of 5-10 models that are just designed for that. Like I loved Rogue Stars because I finally did my little Dead Space crew. I did the crew of the Kellyan. It was super fun. I made a little bit of terrain for it. I painted some Infinity terrain like specifically for it. We played some scenarios for it, and as much as I'm not like driven to go back and play a bunch of Rogue Stars right now, like I'll totally play it if anyone wants to come in and play. But that experience of like collecting the stuff to do it jazzed me up and got me excited. And so there's a bunch of like little games right now coming out for Osprey that I'm really excited about seeing trickle out and doing new stuff for, and that I can like bend my imagination around. So that's happening soon. And what I don't like, the only thing I don't like is I can't do them all. Right? There's so many that I'd like to do that like I don't know who I'd play them with, or the people I would play them with were already playing other things. Like it's just there's so much to do, and I want to do them all, and I just don't have time. And that's usually my biggest struggle, is just never having time to do everything I want to do. Lonely Brick asks, what's your opinion of what went wrong with Dreadfleet? Dreadfleet. Philip J. Meads. Ignore all the other games. Just do more Rumble Slam. I have good news about that, actually. The guys at Rumble Slam, I talked to Keith by email recently because I sent them the link to the video when the Let's Play went up. They were super happy with the Let's Play. They thought it was really cool. They're starting more wrestlers, the superstars and stuff for the 2 casinos that I'm already building. So you'll definitely see more Rumble Slam. And I actually have a bunch of ideas in my head bumbling around with Rumble Slam on how we could do like a Rumble Slam league. And it would be awesome because like we would kick the league off with like a draft, just like doing like a fantasy football draft, where you could basically, you had like let's say 10 million to draft wrestlers with, and that 10 million you're trying to, like, you're going back and forth drafting wrestlers, and they're all coming in a different pool, so you have to draft at least one of each, and then you can go start drafting other ones. So like you have to draft a grappler, you have to draft a big guy, like there's different stables of wrestlers you can draft into. So I'm pretty jazzed about that. There will be more Rumble Slam. Whoa, I hear kids waking up. So we're getting close to the end. So Sarah, I'll just answer this last one. What do I think went wrong with Dreadfleet? I think it was expectation versus reality. Dreadfleet was one of the highest component quality kits I think Games Workshop has ever done. But there wasn't enough pre-marketing done to it to explain that it was it was an all-in-one game. It was a board game. You didn't really need anything outside of it. And there wasn't a lot of ongoing support planned for it with like army lists and new ships. So it was a story in a box, and a really cool story in a box. It was almost like a movie. It was kind of like one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Oh, here comes my girl. Hey, kiddo.
I want to rub my back.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want me to rub your back?
Yeah.
Were you sleeping? Hey, say hi to everybody.
Hi,
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry. You woke up and I wasn't there?
Yes.
You're okay. Hey, I told the story about the bully that you had to talk to at the playground. What did you say to him? What did you say the guy called you a baby? What did you say?
I'm not a baby. I'm not a baby. I'm a big girl.
I'm a big girl. That's right. So anyway, to finish my thought about the Dreadfleet thing, was I think that when people saw it come out, they were expecting it to be Man of War, and it just wasn't Man of War. And so that was the problem, was that the people expected it to be one thing, and it came out with something totally different. And the thing it was awesome, but when you take a bite and you're expecting chocolate, and what you get is horseradish. Horseradish is great on steak.
You just said a bite.
A bite? Yeah, when you have a bite. Like, if you were going to have ice cream, right, and you're eating a big scoop of ice cream, and you thought it was going to be strawberry, but instead it was ketchup, what would happen? Would you be surprised? Would you spit it out?
No.
No, you wouldn't spit it out? You just eat the ketchup? Yeah, well, you're a weirdo then. But that's what I'm pretty sure happened. So anyway, we're rounded out. It's at 3:24, so we're just about 90 minutes right now, and obviously the signal has happened for the end of the stream. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We will do another one of these next week, which will be live on YouTube. This is, of course, the Patreon edition. It'll go live on YouTube right after it's done rendering, so everybody can see this in the future. So thanks, you guys, for being patrons. You guys make this happen, and of course, make this little girl have a place to live and a place to sleep. So can you say thank you?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you guys. We'll see you for more of this in the future. We'll do another mailbag, of course, linked in the video description below, so that you guys can check it out and have... Oh, you're grabbing the mic. She's grabbing the mic. And you guys can have a place to drop more questions going forward to next week. So we'll see you next Monday. Until next time, I'm Ash. Happy Wargaming.